Hi, welcome to Urban Insights. I'm Jayashree Kurup. Today we're talking about land. I have three experts speaking about the subject with me. Professor Prashant Das, he's from IIM Ahmedabad. I have Mr. B.K. Agarwal. He's worked on land as a bureaucrat with the government of India. He's been Chief Secretary of Himachal Pradesh. He's one of our eminent experts on land. And I have with me Sanjay as well. Sanjay is from Landdeed, a very unique initiative, taking land to the next level, land recording records to the next level. We're talking about how India has progressed with land records. Documentation of land records has been on for a while, and about 25 states already have land record portals where consumers can check the records. But we are far from being very easy to navigate in the land record space. So, Mr. Agarwal, I'll start with you. Where is India in this entire? I mean, what was the vision when we started with land documentation, and where are we in this process today, as you see it?
As far as my observation has been that we are doing this work, land record means digitization, I think you mean. So yes, digitization is continuing for last 15 or years or more. A lot of progress has been achieved because one report says that almost 90% of the textual record has been computerized. But if you ask me, I would say that land digitization of land record is not an end in itself. Basically, it should lead to better services to the people. So for that, probably we have not done much. For example, I know Sanjay in Landed, they do digital search for the people, which is a great facility to their clients. But whether this digital search has become easier in last 10 years or 5 years, that is the real test. Probably in that we don't pass with that flying colors.
Okay. Okay, and Professor Das, you're talking. You have been working on a land initiative in IIM Ahmedabad with a organization from Hyderabad. So tell us what was the initiative and why? How has it progressed?
Of all, it's a pleasure to be sitting in the same virtual room with Mr. Agarwal and Sanjay because they bring two very separate perspectives to the land dialogue. I come from the real estate and finance side of the dialogue, if you will. And my main interest in this area was from the standpoint of valuation of land parcels. And then I started engaging with a group in which Mr. Agarwal and many other experts are very actively engaged. It's called India Land Development Conference. And that is where I started learning about various dimensions of land valuation. So we are going to hear from Mr. Agarwal and Sanjay as well. But when it comes to valuing land, there are two very distinct dimensions to it. So, of course, value of a land would depend on its physicality. That physicality relates to the size, the location, its proximity to various amenities, etc. The second very important aspect of land valuation is simply its digitization. As Mr. Agarwal rightly pointed out, digitization itself has two components. One is the physical component where the tenacity of a seller's claim on the physical surface of the earth can be validated. So that is about recording the dimensions and locations of the land parcel. More important than that is the issue of legality and the title, the quality of the title. And that is where we have a lot of work to do. So the government of India has come up with certain policies that are going to digitize the title records. And then we have enterprises like Landdeed, where Sanjay is coming from, that offer us a reliable and more democratized source of information when it comes to looking at the history. But is just having access to the history adequate? Is another question that we need to answer. For example, there is a possibility that I look up the records of a land parcel, but those records have not been updated for whatever reason for a long time. So that is also another area where we need to do a lot of work. So Jayashree, as you pointed out at IIM Ahmedabad, we publish an agricultural land price index. It is called ISALPI, ISALP. We have developed this in collaboration with S Farms India, that is headed by Mr. Kamesh Muparaju from Hyderabad. And we have a pricing model for agricultural land parcels. And we do some GIS enhancements to the data that we receive from S Farms India. And that agricultural land price index is a result of a pricing model. So we argue that price of land parcels are a function of the attributes, qualities of the land parcel themselves, and a function of time. So we segregate these two components, we pull out the component of pricing that is a function of time, and that becomes our agricultural land price index. Long story short, when we run these models, analytics model for pricing land parcels, we realize that our models are just around 70% accurate. That means we still have 30% of variance in land price to be explained. And I suspect that a lot of that has got to do with what Sanjay's enterprise is going to offer in terms of digital information about land. And secondly, about the quality of the title. So we can go ahead with this dialogue, but I will pass the baton to you for the time being.
Absolutely. Sanjay, now he has passed the baton on to you. And very quickly, why did you start what you did? It came out of a personal problem, right? And today, where have you reached in terms of being able to make usable information available to end users?
Yeah, I think I don't look at land digitization as a monolithic sort of effort or singular. One thing to understand is that when we talk about digitization of land or property records, for that matter, um, it doesn't fall on a single entity, right? Because property records are a state subject, and then if you actually look within the state itself, the registration, revenue department, the municipalities, even the court system, these are not linked yet. So I wouldn't consider digitization merely taking a paper and turning that into pixelation. That's not digitization, because at the end of the day, one thing to understand is valuation or any of these things that are available to us are really only available because you increase accessibility, because only when you increase accessibility do you increase transparency. And in this bucket is where valuations really fall, right? And so if you don't increase accessibility and make accessibility of land records very easy for the consumer, you will not be able to increase transparency. And if you don't increase transparency, you will not be able to increase transactability. So I think contrary to what Mr. Agarwal might be saying, like, I don't think we made enough efforts. I don't think, like I said, I don't consider digitization merely taking paper format, turning them into an archive and putting them on a computer or online database to be enough. Because there are many things that are digitized in this world. That doesn't mean it's necessarily accessible to people. If you look at a lot of science, if you look, I'm sure like a professor produces a lot of papers. And like if you actually look at the readability and how accessible it is to people, it's not of much use if it's behind a big paywall, right? There needs to be more research that comes out of this field. And in order for there to be more research output, you really, again, need to go back to the question of accessibility. It's one thing to have the registration say that, look, according to the EC and the sale deed, this person is the owner. It's another thing for the revenue department to show on a property tax, then it's again a different owner. And I think in India, people need to separate between what is a property and what is a person, right? Documentation is a representation of a particular property, and property is delinked as an entity from the person. because everybody ascribes personal ownership towards a property, because there could be properties that have no owners. Like there was recently an article, there's 1.8 million acres in Telangana where it literally has no titles. Do we consider that digitization? If we consider digitization that to be the fact, would we have the number of disputes that we do? And how do disputes affect valuations? So I think it again comes back to making these records very easily accessible. Now, what are some things that we've done? Like, look, almost on every state website, if you go to, one of the things you need to do is enter a survey number, customer number, kata number. If I ask prospective person sitting on this call, do we know the survey number of the property that we're sitting in? I would assume more often than not, the answer is no. We wouldn't know. So I'll give you a simple example. If you go into our app and you type in Maharashtra, Telangana, or any of these states, you put in an address like a Google address, and we're able to pull up titles. That to me is a necessary and a prerequisite towards accessibility. Only when we make it as easily accessible to the people can we discover other facets about that property. So that's how I kind of look at digitization. I think we're very early stages, primordial, but India's got a long history, so it's a tough task. I think everybody's doing the best they can, but I think in this space we need more private sector participation.
Absolutely. I actually was involved way back, it may be 2009, 10, when the Delhi Land Pooling Act was coming up, and they needed some information on land. And I used to be with Magic Bricks, and so we at least had listed prices, what was expected value of land, and we pulled out our data from 2006 to 2010, and we made it available to the NCAER and the National Housing and the I think NCAER and DDA to actually figure out whether they could fix a value to the land in Delhi. But one of the things that we found was that it was very arbitrary. Valuation itself is very arbitrary. One, the how clean the titles are. Two, ownership and the disputes do not get reflected anywhere. And the third thing was that valuation itself was is a very non conformist kind of thing. Every valuer has a different take up. So, Mr. Agarwal, I'd like to come to you and talk about, we've got the revenue records, and we've got the registration, registered, the registration offices. Why don't we have a synergy of all these documentations so that there is not so much, it's more easy to navigate?
So what actually is, you are right that in India this we have deed registration system which is maintained by the sub registrar or registrars, and then we have revenue record which are called record of rights. These are two separate and almost independent systems of keeping records, and there must be synergy, and we should work towards that. Unfortunately we have not done so because both are governed by separate laws. And India what has happened, we have been still not very proactive in touching our old laws. I always say that the laws made by English, they are not so sacrosanct that you cannot touch them. Now the requirements have changed. Their purpose of enacting those laws was different. So we must do it. And let me tell you that many countries, European countries, there is a campaign that the land registry and cadastre should be merged. Now, not many have been successful because both are different organization and they always register these things. But there must, this is a must, I think, to reform our system. And what I feel, that first step can be that at least bring them under one roof, under one officer. That is very easily possible. For example, for urban areas we have a lot of problems, because in urban areas first thing is the record of rights either are not existing or they are not updated, right? Then the urban areas, lot of most of the problems we talk about land deals is in urban areas, because land is costly, records are not existing, people do not know each other. So all those problems which we keep on pointing out about the land records mostly exist in urban areas, right? So in urban areas it is not very difficult because the municipal committee is interested in keeping tax records, So they are maintaining actually a third kind of record, that is the tax record, which is also linked to the same land parcels. So I feel that merger can be there, first step can be there. Let's say under municipal committee, a municipal officer is given the power of the collector for the purpose of that record, revenue record. Then he is given the powers of the sub registrar or registrar for maintaining the registries, and then he has already powers of the tax collection. So once these three are sort of at least under one roof, so there would be synergy. And yes, but we have to make certain changes in the law also. We cannot do these things without just by digitization, just by having a software or some administrative instructions, etc., which we have been trying. We have to change the laws, and it may not require very great change. It may require very small changes. Like in my book, I have pointed out certain things, but if there is a wider discussion, we can always reach to some conclusion that what kind of changes in the laws are required. But again, I will reiterate that because our land administration system is based on laws, so we cannot bring much improvement without changing the laws. Just by bringing technology, we cannot achieve the desired objective.
Hold that thought, Mr. Agarwal, because I'm going to come back to you for the discuss the laws in greater detail. But I'd like to involve Deepak Sanan. He has worked with the NCR. He has led the project which was supported by the Umidyar network. And Deepak, your people were spread out across the country. You worked with so many other people across the country in forming some kind of land records, valuation, and so on. Help us understand what that project was and where that project is today.
So, hi Jayashree. Hello BK, Prashant. Nice to see you guys. And let me start by saying that the NCAER Land Records and Services Index was the project with which I was associated for a few years. We brought out two rounds of the index in 2020 and 2021. The index basically involved uh, looking at what is the status of digitization of the record of rights, the land records, and the cadastral maps across India, and also to what extent the various processes involved in the deeds registration system are computerized and, and networked. That was one sort of 60% of the project, or well, 50. Part of the project was about seeing how citizen friendly is the is this digitized record, how good is the access for citizens to this record, uh, is it available only from a revenue office, can they get it from an e-service center, or even better, do they get a digitized copy online on demand on any time. Finally, 40% of the index looked at the quality of the record, which means we actually tried to see with a number of proxies to what extent the record was up to date, to what extent it reflected actual possession on the ground, to what extent the area which was shown in the ROR was accurate, to what extent the use was as reflected in the ROR was accurate, and finally, to what extent encumbrances were being recorded in the record of rights. So five elements. To We use proxies because it's really not feasible to actually do on ground verification for even a reasonable sample in a short period of time. So this was the basic project which we ran for 2 years. It came to a halt after 2021 because I don't know, partly I suppose the funding dried up, and partly maybe NCAR lost interest. Uh, whether What did it show? It showed that some states were doing pretty well on digitization extent. Uh, the quality of the record was mixed in most cases, and we also ran a subsidiary uh, project within this of looking at to what extent the websites which which have this data for clients, to what extent are they citizen friendly, how well do they perform on search and navigation. So it is interesting to see that while on the extent of digitization and records, uh, Madhya Pradesh did very well, states like West Bengal, Maharashtra did very well. They didn't necessarily perform very well on search and navigability of their sites. So not enough attention was being paid to being client friendly, you might say. The next stage of the project, which never came to fruition, was to actually do client surveys, to actually look at how do clients perceive these records. Are they aware of digitization? Do they find it useful? What is the utility to them? How accessible it is? Is it from their perspective? And what do they see as the accuracy or comprehensiveness or utility of the record itself? So that never happened, but overall it was a useful experience. It did bring out that uh, it brought out, most important, that some states were willing to try and go the extra mile to improve their ranking on this index, and to carry out what BK was calling some of those legal and procedural changes to make themselves more citizen friendly, and bring in better processes. But overall, I think something like that has to be continued for a few years, and it can, with the kind of additions we were thinking of, make a difference in bringing a competitive spirit in improving records. Yeah. So that's insofar as the work on LRSI was concerned. Yeah.
During the COVID, there were a lot of youngsters who were earning big money and didn't have very many places to invest them. And they, at that point of time, had started picking up land in different cities, especially IT driven cities. It was Pune, it was Hyderabad, Chennai, Bangalore, Gurgaon. There was a lot of investment in land by small investors, and as magic bricks, we used to interact with them, with brokers on one hand who used to facilitate it, and with the consumers, these were live shows. One of the things that I did find was a lot of people found at least these basic records being available in these 25 states was very useful to the end consumer. I don't know how useful it is, by how accurate it was, but at least they felt a certain level of comfort in that some kind of digitization process had begun. Having said that, many brokers said that what people were buying, these youngsters, were in many cases Gautan land, which land in Hyderabad, which was not, the records were not right, and several, there was no means of checking all this. Now, Prashant, I'm going to come to you because you've talked about agricultural land. With laws like Swamitva, have things improved?
Honestly, I have not seen the progress of Swamitwa because that data hasn't trickled down to me as yet. But I'm personally very bullish about the prospects of the whole project. I'm aware, and Mr. San and Mr. Agarwal would know better than me, that certain states have made better progress than many other states. The state where I come from, Bihar, seems to have made a decent progress on this. Um, Once we have that data available, one part of the challenge will have been addressed already. But so far as I understand, Swamitwa is about digitizing analog information that is available. Uh, does it also take care of updation of that information? Is something that perhaps the two experts would help clarify further. But if Swamitwa completes in the next few years, I think that is going to add a lot of rationality in the land market because we will have superior models for valuation. And the only noise there then would be the black market transactions in land. We still do not have access to the actual transaction prices of most of the transactions that happen in India. So Mr. Agarwal was very prudent in pointing out that we need some regulatory changes, some laws have to change. I think The stamp duty is a British legacy that we continue to carry. A large part of our government system has become dependent on the revenue that comes from the stamp duty, and hence getting rid of it is going to be a major challenge. But just removing or substantially minimizing the stamp duty will do a lot of favor to the whole economy, because land is not just one of the asset classes. This is perhaps the most important asset class we have as a nation. And as Mark Twain said, you cannot build more land. So we have what we have until 2070. Our population will continue to increase, and there is no question that the land prices will continue to surge. That means allocation of land to various resources and various users or buyers and owners is going to get, center stage in our policy dialogues. So in short, I'm very supportive of any project similar to Swamitwa. I think it's a wonderful move. It has its own challenges, and I'm sure Mr. Sanan will throw some light on what those possible challenges are. But before you move the mic from my hand to someone else, Jayashree, I would ask Mr. Agarwal to share more with us about his book.
So this, because Mr. Prashant has asked me about my book. So this book is Land Registration, Global Practices and Lessons for India. So this I wrote, say, around in 2017-18, and the whole process is that I have tried to analyze the system of land records or land administration in India, record of rights as well as deed registration. Then I studied six systems of six countries. The three title registration countries, that is Germany, Australia, and the Germany and the UK, and three deed registration countries, that is France, Netherlands, and the USA. So I have tried to find out that, what are the differences in these systems, how they are operating it, and then how did they implement, what kind of problems they were facing when they started with this. And then because there's a lot of talk for last 15 years to implement title registration in India. But as I have written in my book, that in all academic circles, everyone is convinced that the title registration should be implemented in India, as if we are something, this is the obvious target which we have not achieved. But practically, nothing happens. Rajasthan has tried it, Maharashtra has made the draft, Delhi has made the draft. There was a talk about that someone has made the draft for Chandigarh also. Andhra Pradesh worked for 3-4 years, then they got the president approval also, and then again it has been shelved. So there are reasons. There are reasons because it is very, very difficult to change such a drastic change in the system. And second thing is that you have to really see that whether it is really required. Because as Mr. Prashant was saying, and then Deepak Sanan was saying, then whether has someone made a client survey that what people are asking from you. Okay, whether they are asking for title registration or they are asking for better records only. Okay, if someone says that 60% of the disputes in the courts are land related, first thing is that does not mean anything, because land is a very important asset and people fight for assets only. So naturally the cases will be related to land, but we have to analyze those cases. And if we reach to the conclusion that these cases will be solved because of title registration, then only we can think of that. I am sure that no such study has been done that whether title registration is really required. Anyway, in my book, I have said that that is such a drastic change. It requires so much changes that it will be very difficult. And second thing is that when you take one step, you can't take a back step then, because then you are stuck with that. But there are many changes which are possible in the existing system, which are very easy to make, and that will make life of people very, very much better than what it is today. That will make life much better. And those changes are reversible. Suppose you make changes in registration, some amendment in the registration act, maybe that after 10 years you think that some modification has to be done, you can do it. But if you take a step towards title registration, is a completely different system. Okay, and the experience So then one example I've given, then if you see top 10 economy of the world, half of them are using deed registration system, half of them are using title registration system. France has a deed registration system, USA has a deed registration system, Netherlands has a deed registration system. In UK also, Scotland till say 30 years back was having deed registration system. So it does not mean that deed registration is inferior, title registration is better. There is no such thing. Whatever you do well is better for you.
Absolutely. Sanjay, I'm going to come to you. You have navigated, clearly, there are problems. And the problems are that we have multiple means of documenting, and some of which is very informal, some of which is we are trying to formalize it, digitize it, we are trying to put cadastral maps into it. But you have navigated the system and you've come up with a formula. Help me understand how you navigated the system, and what are the two or three very big changes that you think should happen, because you are working on the ground, right?
Yeah, I think I s- one of the questions is I know there's wealth of data on the type of systems that we have, the pros and the cons. We have tons of data on the ranking of these websites and the accessibility of it. But I think very few people ask the question, who is building this? And that's really the fundamental question to answer, right? So if you have somebody like, let's say, a government organization speaking with government bureaucrats, building government things, then how do we ascertain that's actually what the people need? I mean, I think the question about whether deed registration or title registration is actually secondary. I think the primary question to answer is, even with the systems that we have in place, like, who did we ask before we built those in the manner that we built them? Was it certain people sitting in an office deciding this is how they'd like it? And a software company was mandated to come in and build these systems, and they built it according to that spec? Is that who we're building for? Right? Like, what is a tender system for, providing software providers for somebody digitizing these land records? So we've seen a mix of NIC, we've seen a mix of Infosys, we've seen a mix of TCS. Like, how is the system build out being propagated throughout, right? Because in the same state, there is instances where the registration backend systems are built by a different software company than the revenue department systems, right? And so that's a number one thing. I think title and deed registrations matter, but what really matters is what you were able to build on top of that. So yes, US does have deed registration systems similar to India. US and India have very similar systems when it comes to property registration. But the fact of the matter is, title insurance is private sector participation in US. Now, how are those companies structured? So that's a monoline insurance business. Like, what have we done with the deed system to build the infrastructure on top of that? Right? That's ultimately what matters, because that's what the users care about. The user doesn't literally, I mean, when I say user, somebody that is searching for a property record, it matters very less to him what the system is and which department. He's coming there with the intent to transact or do something regards to his property, whether that's to get a loan or to get do a sale. Now, is it possible for us today to simply go to any particular government website to do any transaction end to end? Because ultimately that's what really matters, right? You and I are not sitting around in our house just casually just checking up who owns what property. As fascinating as that sounds, prior to me building, I can tell you from actual user data, that's not what people do, right? And when you have so many different systems that are being built in a certain way, then obviously integration is very hard. And as Mr. Agarwal was saying, and it's a fair point, there needs to be changes that need to be brought. But before we often have this internal saying inside the company: if you are unable to change, you are unable to create. So when we are unable to change, the answer usually with most governments is to create another body that's more centralized, that comes up with more restrictions. But we've seen over and over again in cases where centralization in India, in particularly what is a state subject, doesn't really work well. To some sense, decentralization actually provides some checks and balances. What's easier to do than even build another department, I would argue, is technology gives you this accessibility to have information synchronization. It's much easier to build a technology stack that makes the registration system speak with the revenue system and check the synchronization between this data than it is to create another department that's wholly taking ownership of all of this, right? Um, so that is what I say. Like the systems matter very less, as Mr. Agarwal is saying. Different systems have different successes for various reasons in different countries, but it is what is built on top of that system that really matters, right? Title insurance makes possible the deed registration system to be effective in US. And that's a legacy of 120 years. What have we done with IRDAI to make possible for somebody to apply for a title insurance license today? So that's one thing, right? And we talk about like changing perhaps the legal system. Obviously, lawyers play a big part in that as much as legislators, right? But I don't think we can also argue that lawyers in India make tons of money on legal opinions. So is that really in their best interest to really move towards more conclusive style type of titling? And do we want some sort of validation from the government? Like we are able to say today with on a social media profile with a blue tick mark, this person is verified. Can we actually say that about our properties in India? It matters very little to me what system we run. How close are we to allowing a woman that is running a kirana shop in UP to be able to quickly go to the bank and get a loan for a property that she's owned for 30 years, right? That's ultimately like social mobility, right? And ultimately that's what adds to the optimism of country and growth. And as long as we're not able to do that, it doesn't matter what laws we put in place, what systems we put in place, how many departments we create. It is the intent to do something that really matters. And I feel that intent is really driven in a very single threaded way. If I look at registration department, they're very much focused on maximizing registration. And as Professor Prashant was saying, the registration and stamps revenue, they become dependent on it. 7% up to 10%, 11% in some states. Like then why would people be incentivized to show the true value? There are cities that haven't changed their guideline values in almost a decade and a half. We clearly know that's not the case, right? Now, if you're looking at revenue department, their intent is to maximize perhaps the fiscal revenue. Could be property tax or anything else, right? That comes in. So when you're looking at records, you and I are looking at property records as one to transact, but at the very underlying layer, I don't think that's how like our political and civil system is kind of built to handle, right? But I think technology can fix this without creating something new and overly centralizing again, because that's the advantage of tech. So that's what I say. Yeah.
Okay. In fact, when we started just before the digitization of land records move started, I was in the Economic Times. I used to attend all those discussions that were held. The public consults that were held, and at that time the whole purpose was that sub-registrar data should be digitized, revenue records should be digitized, there should be a synchronization of all this. I mean, when we started with such lofty ideals. 15 years down the line, Deepak, we are still talking about should we have one agency or the other? Should we have all this? Where do you think we went wrong? Because we had the finest minds working on that digitization process. We had the finest minds in the bureaucracy working on that.
So we can from our own perspectives, both in terms of how do we visualize problems and how we visualize solutions. It's a bit of the six blind men of Hindustan game. You're looking at the elephant, and if every person says, you know I want an institutional fix, I want a technology fix, I want a XYZ fix. Everybody will approach this elephant from their angle and say, I have the answer. I mean, I'm not going to say that I have all the answers. I come from a certain background and from a certain understanding. And obviously, I will uh, plumb for that. And my uh, uh, fortunately or unfortunately, my views align very much with BK's. We are two people in the land space who uh, tend to think very on very similar lines about how should we approach the whole question of titling systems, how should we view technology as an aid in this, and where do what are limitations, what are pluses. uh, and quite independently we've arrived at this position. It's not as if we've been working together constantly and saying, oh, this is what we need to say. uh, uh, I'm going to, instead of directly answering your questions, where did we go wrong, what was this 15 years, I'm going to pick up two or three things and say, okay, you look at digitization of land records, which started in 1989 with the first central schemes, right? Now, 35 years down the line, we are still in a process where we still say legacy record digitization is not necessarily complete. It's getting there, but not complete. RORs are more or less in most states done. Cadastral maps still have a problem. Integrating both of them has a problem. Deeds registration, our system is more or less systems. The softwares are written in many states are being practiced to ensure that you do have, to an extent, end to end digitized systems for doing your deeds registration. Legacy records lag behind in terms of how far they have been digitized. But overall, what is the experience? The experience is one, build on what you have. If you try to abandon it and try to do something totally de novo and say that you're going to get some really state of the art, fancy stuff system in place, you're not going to get there. You're only going to create more problems. So build on what you have, start by actually digitizing legacy records, keep integrating other databases to achieve, as BK says, a more comprehensive, a more up to date, a more accurate record. Let it have warts, let it have problems, let it have shortcomings, but keep trying to integrate databases and make this a better record. That's the second thing. And the third is a don't. What we've discovered in the last 20 years is don't talk about resurveys. It's a red herring. Resurvey, accurate, technology based. Oh, I'm going to do the most accurate technology based resurvey. It's a red herring. It's taking you down absolutely the wrong path, because it's just opening a Pandora's box of whole lot of problems of variation with a legacy record, and disputes which you are trying to minimize with a better record are just going to multiply enormously. Don't go down that road. That, unfortunately, and this is the next point I want to, just one more point, one more point on this, and we don't seem to learn this lesson. So this, last month we've announced a new 2024 capital investment scheme. Says create a new urban record. The incentives are there. Government of India will pay an incentive for a new urban property record. And what does it say? A de novo, fancy, state of the art record will be created within 3 years. I mean, we don't seem to learn. Let's learn from that rural experience. There is no such thing. There is a legacy even in the urban spaces. We've got to work with that legacy. We've got to build on that, as BK was saying. Let's build on that, not try and do something which will just result. Every resurvey, every new kind of technology survey in the last 20 years in different states has ended up on the shelf. It has ended up not being used. You don't want to do that with urban now. Why can't we learn? So your answer to your question is we are not willing to learn. It's so much easier to just create something, announce a new thing and start creating. And this is all related. I go back to 70 years, 75 years. The whole idea of development in India is that somehow it's about new. It's not about making what you have work better. And that really creates our problems. I'll stop for the moment. There was one question from Prashant on registration. Why aren't stamp duty rates going to go down? It's a political economy question, Prashant. We have now, with our unified GSTs, we've squeezed the states to a situation where they have only really two or three sources of revenue left. If we want stamp duties to come down to developed country levels, if we want to really see registration as something which should be charged for only as a user fee, not as a source of tax, then the center will have to take the lead, become more transparent in its sharing of taxes with the states, and start saying, yes, we are willing to give you more, we are willing to be transparent, and why don't you come down? There is no trust in this system. The trust has to be established by the center. And I don't see the center willing to do that right now.
Yeah. Mr. Agarwal, before I come to you, I want to talk about the laws that you mentioned. Prashant, I want to ask you one question before that. Taking off from what Sanjay said, three things that he flagged. One is that our properties are not our records are not bankable. If you want to go out and get a loan, can you get that loan? Very often not. The second thing is that the insurance, title insurance, is something that we don't have, and we are very far from title insurances right now. For a sector like real estate and even manufacturing, where large tracts of land have to be there, title insurance is a big thing, and that's not happened in India at all. And the third thing I think is that uh, I'm sorry, I've forgotten that. Why don't you answer these two?
So I have been very intrigued and quite empathetic to what Mr. Mandava has said. In fact, I have had discussions with him on these fronts. And indeed, to a great extent, the rationalization of land markets would happen if we start having some sort of title insurance. And I mean, there have been some experimentations made in India on this front. And simply because the insurers haven't had access to good quality data, structured data, for all their good reasons, they overprice their insurance products, rendering it almost infeasible. So it's very exciting that Sanjay's firm is thinking on those lines, and I've reflected my sentiments to him earlier also. I feel that uh, perhaps we also need to appreciate that the government system, however efficient, inefficient uh, it is, and the private markets act in two different spheres with two separate sets of objectives. The government's job is not to be user friendliness. The government's job is to be public friendliness. Um, the government's source of revenue is very indirect. For private firms, sources of revenue are very direct. The governments also have to deal with political issues that, of course, infuses all sorts of inefficiencies and all sorts of issues that we observe. So when government comes up with some policies or intent, we should of course critique it, and the government should have the audacity to accept the criticism. And the more they accept the criticism, the more efficient we become. But as an academic, I have equal stake on both the sides, on the policy side as well as as a school as a student of business. I have interest on the business side as well. And when both the sides come together and try to at least have a dialogue in their own ways on solving the same issue, I think it's an exciting proposition. There may be flaws on both the sides, but in general, they are not competing with each other because their spheres are different, their targets are different, their sources of revenues are different. So, simple example: if you look at some financial databases, let's I don't want to name. There's some very famous, popular, expensive private market products offered by entrepreneurs that provide structured financial data to researchers and businesses. Are they creating all that data? Are they generating all the data? No, all they're doing is reaching out to various departments of the government, collect that data, sanitize it, and present it in a way that is user friendly. So, on one front, there was someone who worked on making sure that the data exists. That is perhaps one place, especially in terms of land, only government has access to the kind of data that we need. They are trying to make that data available. That data has a lot of problems. It has a lot of legacy problems, and the data quality is questionable. But at least the data is being made available. That doesn't stop the private enterprises. That actually encourages private enterprises to create new products out of the new raw materials that has been created. So I think it's exciting from both the sides from that standpoint.
Absolutely. And I'd like to say that Urban Insights is soon going to come out with a stakeholder meet on land. We're working towards this. This is the first of the conversations. We will have a couple more conversations, may call you guys back again once more, before we actually have a offline stakeholder meet with the governments participating, because we think that the time has come when you need to take the bull by the horns and actually sort out these problems. We are almost out of time. Mr. Agarwal, I want you to just quickly talk about, you mentioned some of the laws that we need to dovetail into each other, or make them workable. If you could quickly talk about that, and then we will conclude the conversation.
So, basic two laws are there, like law for record of right, that is mostly Land Revenue Acts of the states, and then the Registration Act and Transfer of Property Act, and yes, they are succession laws, because they are also very important in this. There need to be some changes, and for Registration Act, there are a lot of exemptions, so that the many transactions do not come on the record, like family settlement, gift by a Muslim in certain agricultural lands. Okay, so we should ensure that all transactions in land should come on the record. For example, in Transfer of Property Act, it says that lot of transactions can be without a document. Okay, without a written document, it makes necessary that only sale, mortgage, gift, and some lease more than 1 year should be only under the written document. And something is not written, that it will not be registered also. So probably change can be made, that no transaction relating to land can be without a written document and without a registration document. Similarly, some changes to bring synergy between the record of rights and this thing, land registration, that can be there. So changes may not be very big, but more changes are required. Like for example, procedure. What Sanjay has said, that is very important, and Mr. Prashant also mentioned that involvement, because people are concerned with the services, and probably Deepak Sanan also said that people are not concerned with what kind of record you are keeping at your back end or you're in the record rooms. People are concerned with services. So now we should focus that how better services can be provided to the people, and how these can be made better and better and better. So all our modification in the laws, change of the procedure should be oriented towards that.
I think he has made some points. We will, since we are almost out of time, I'm going to close this conversation here right now. But I would exhort you to please join me in the second edition of this conversation, where we put it out to the public. We are doing some public discussions on this, and once we get some feedback, we will come back to you and maybe have another expert discussion on this project. But do try and participate in the offline stakeholder meet that we are planning very soon. We'll keep you informed. Thank you so much for joining us, and it was a very, very good discussion. Thank you. Found this video useful? Please subscribe to this channel for more such videos. Do like and share with as many people as you can.